First story. This story happened to me several years ago, and to this day, I cannot forget that dark experience. It was a dark autumn night when my friends and I decided to spend the night in an old cemetery that had been the subject of creepy rumors in our small town. The two of us got together, me and my best friend, Mike. Our flashlights shone in the darkness, and we tried to keep our cool despite the heavy feeling of anxiety. The entrance to the cemetery was shrouded in the web of time, and the darkness surrounded us like ghosts. We passed through the huge gate and stepped onto the ground on which the dead rested. For the first few minutes, we just stood there and looked at the gloomy graves, as if waiting for something to happen. Our flashlights produced ghostly shadows that gave the illusion that the graves were moving. Suddenly, from afar, we heard a faint whisper, as if someone's voice was carried by the winds. This sound gave us an animalistic feeling of fear. We began to explore the cemetery, carefully approaching one of the old graves. Inside it, we found a forgotten, crumbling coffin. My fear only grew, and I felt something inside me freeze. But suddenly, in the distance, we noticed a ghostly glow. It was a figure that seemed to be made of light and shadow. She smoothly approached us, and fear completely overwhelmed me. We tried to run, but our legs would not obey us, and we found ourselves chained to the spot, as if the cemetery itself did not allow us to leave. The figure was getting closer and closer, and its outlines became clearer. She was a woman wearing a white dress, with long hair that covered her face. Her eyes sparkled like dying candles. She raised her hands towards us, and I heard her weak voice. "Help." We could no longer stand this horror and ghostly vision. Somehow, we freed ourselves from the shackles of fear and rushed to the exit from the cemetery. The shadow disappeared, but its voice remained in our ears. Since then, neither Mike nor I have dared to return to this cemetery. This experience remains in our hearts, reminding us that some places hold terrible secrets that are best left alone. We ran out of the cemetery, making our way through the darkness and gloom, slowly gaining breath after the terrible event. Our hearts beat so loudly that it seemed to us that even the dead lying in the graves around us could hear them. Before that night, we had never believed in ghosts or supernatural phenomena, but that figure, that woman in a white dress, left us with an irresistible feeling that something unknown and sinister was hidden in this cemetery. We returned home and told our friends what happened. Some laughed and claimed that we were simply afraid of our own shadows, but others expressed respect for our bravery in even daring to explore the cemetery at night. As time passed, we began to wonder who the woman we saw was. We turned to the historical archives and learned that she was a young woman who died in mysterious circumstances many years ago. Her grave was forgotten and lost to time, just like her story. That night in the cemetery changed the way we look at the world. We were no longer so sure that everything could be explained rationally. Since then, we have come to respect ancient places and their secrets, realizing that among the dark tombs there may be something hidden that goes beyond our understanding. Second story. This story began when I went on a long car wash trip deep into the backcountry. I needed to get to a small village that few people had heard of, and that was not on my map. Locals called it the Forgotten Village, and judging by their stories, this place was a real secret. When I arrived in the area where the village was supposed to be located, an inhospitable darkness awaited me, and a strange noise of the wind created an atmosphere of mystery. There was no indication on the map that this village existed, and I felt as if I had entered a world that was not on the maps. The village was surrounded by dense forest, and the first thing that caught your eye was that all the buildings looked abandoned and abandoned. The houses were covered with cobwebs, and only the winds carried the hermit's silence. I decided to walk through this village to understand what happened. Gradually, I noticed that ghostly lights were shining in the windows of some houses, although the houses seemed abandoned. My footsteps became louder in this silence, and my feelings of fear intensified. I entered one of the houses to investigate more closely what was happening. It was dark inside, and only a flashlight illuminated my steps. I heard whispers and faint voices, but could not determine where they came from. It's as if the souls of those who lived here before remained within these walls. In the room I was exploring, I found an old photograph of the local villagers, but this photograph looked very old. What happened to this village, and why did it disappear from the maps? These questions remained unanswered. I left the village feeling that I carried its secrets with me, and felt relieved when I got out of this mysterious area. Since then, I could not forget the forgotten village, and it always reminded me that in our world there are many unknown and mysterious places that are hidden from our sight and remain a mystery. Over time, I decided to return to the forgotten village, learn more about its secrets, and try to unravel the riddles it held. My second visit was no less strange. When I arrived in the village again, I noticed that her condition had worsened. The buildings seemed even more desolate, and the atmosphere became even more depressing. However, now I noticed something even strange. Ghostly figures were slowly passing along the abandoned streets. These ghosts looked like local villagers, but their faces were filled with sorrow and suffering. It was as if they were locked in time, doomed to wander among the abandoned streets and instantly disappear when I tried to approach them. My heart beat faster, and I decided to delve deeper into this mysterious world. I explored different houses and found clues that could reveal the mysteries of the past. One day, in the basement of one of the houses, I discovered an old diary book that seemed to belong to one of the local residents. It described strange events taking place in the village and claimed that it was subject to some kind of curse. The evening darkness once again enveloped the village, and the ghostly figures began to move, as if they were coming to life at that hour. One of the ghosts approached me. His face was gloomy and haggard. He whispered something, but his words were quiet and unclear. I decided to try to help these souls. After collecting the facts and the journal, I began researching the curse that seemed to plague the village for a long time. My research led me to an ancient ritual that seemed to be the cause of the disaster that destroyed this place. To break the curse and help the ghosts, I decided to perform a cleansing ritual. It was a dangerous and mysterious undertaking, but I had no other choice. Ultimately, I was able to free the village from the curse, and the ghosts slowly disappeared, as if they had found peace. The forgotten village no longer exists on the maps, but it now remains in my memory as a place where I encountered the mysterious and the supernatural. It was a journey that changed my understanding of what lies in worlds unknown to most of us, and what can be found if we choose to explore their depths. Third story. This story happened to me several years ago, when I decided to go on a trip to one of the most mysterious and terrible forests, about which there were legends. This forest was called the Forest of Shadow. When I first entered this forest, its ancient trees seemed huge, as if they had been there for a millennium. It was completely shaded by thick foliage, and the sun's rays barely penetrated through them. The air was cold and musty, and the winds made terrible sounds in the distance. With every step deeper into the forest, I felt as if it was swallowing me, entwining me with its dark branches. The sounds of animals and insects seemed to disturb this gloomy silence. Strange shadows sometimes flickered on the trees, and my nerves began to tremble with an unclear sense of danger. Soon I noticed that my steps began to lead me deeper into the forest, and it became impossible to return to the exit. The forest seemed to have confused the path, and my map and compass became useless. I felt that something was watching me from behind the trees, and the whispers of the winds seemed like words spoken by unknown forces. With each passing hour, my anxiety only intensified. Suddenly, I came across an old dried root hidden under the leaves. When I started digging around, I discovered an antique metal box. Its lid was decorated with strange runes and symbols that were not familiar to me. When I opened the box, I discovered something terrible. There were bones inside, and on the walls of the box were carved words that were unreadable to me. This was a terrible sign that this forest kept many secrets and mysteries. As night began to fall, I decided to set up camp, hoping that in the morning I would be able to find a way out of this ominous place. At night, The forest came to life even more, and flickering eyes began to appear from the darkness, and rustling sounds surrounded me. I heard whispers and something like laughter, but I didn't see a single soul around. In the morning, when I tried to continue my journey, I discovered that the box with bones had disappeared, and I found myself on the other side of the forest. My heart beat with relief when I finally made it out of the forest of shadows. It was a journey that left an indescribable impression on me. The forest of shadow turned out to be much scarier and more mysterious than I could have imagined. Now I understand that there are places in this world that are best left alone and never explore their depths. My memories of the forest of shadow and the mysterious events that took place within it will always remain in my memory, reminding me that our world is full of mysteries and places about which we know little. This journey taught me to respect the forces of nature and the supernatural, and to remain humble in the face of their greatness and power. Every time I look into a dense forest or into a dark night, I remember this experience and feel a shiver run down my spine, reminding me that some mysteries are best left unsolved. Fourth story. When I was a child, I had a collection of old toys that belonged to my great-grandmother. They were old and shabby, but they always seemed interesting and mysterious to me. Among them were soft toys, which felt especially strange to me. One of these toys was an antique teddy bear whose rough, plush surface looked as if it had survived a long and arduous journey through time. My grandmother always said that this toy belonged to her mother, my great-grandmother, and was with her all her life. When I brought this little bear into my room, sometimes his eyes seemed to move, following me. I felt like he seemed to come to life when no one was watching. But this seemed to me just a childish fantasy, and I did not pay attention to it. One night, while I was lying in bed, I heard a quiet noise coming from the room. I opened my eyes and saw the bear cub smoothly rise from the shelf and begin to move. I was paralyzed with fear, but I could not take my eyes off this terrifying scene. The bear cub first crawled to the edge of the shelf and then rolled down and began to approach my bed. His eyes glowed like two candles in the dark. He slowly but surely approached me, as if he wanted to say something. I closed my eyes and began to pray, hoping that this was just a dream or a nightmare. When I opened my eyes again, the bear cub was already lying next to me, his eyes sparkling as if he was smiling. He stayed next to me all night, and I couldn't sleep. The next morning, the bear was back on the shelf as if nothing had happened, but I knew that this was not a dream and that my collection of toys was hiding something unknown and scary. I decided not to touch this bear cub anymore and leave him alone. This story remained in my memory for the rest of my life, and I could never explain what really happened that night. My fear of toys has remained with me forever, and now I am always wary of old and mysterious things that may hide something more terrible than it seems at first glance. Ever since this strange incident with the bear cub, I began to avoid my room at night. My own collection of old toys began to seem suspicious and mysterious to me. I preferred to keep the bedroom door closed at night and wake up in a cold sweat after nightmares about a bear cub that was moving and seemed to be trying to come towards me. Every time I entered the room, it seemed to me that my old toys were looking at me, as if they knew the secret of this terrible night. However, over time, I began to think that my imagination had played a cruel joke on me, and I decided to return to my collection, trying to forget past fears. But one day, when I was determined to put away my fears and approach the bear cub, something strange happened. As soon as I touched his soft, rough skin, the bear cub shuddered and moved as if alive. It was so terrible that I threw it away with force and rushed to the door. When I turned around, the bear was lying on the floor, not moving, as if nothing had happened. My hands were shaking, and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. This could not be my imagination. The bear cub really came to life, and I saw it with my own eyes. I decided to leave the room and never return. Now my collection of old toys sits abandoned and forgotten in that room. I could no longer see anything cute about old stuffed animals and prefer to stay away from them. This mysterious story taught me a lesson that even the most harmless things can hide secrets that are best left undisclosed. Fifth story. That story happened a few years ago when I was living in an old house in the suburbs. The house was large and old with a lot of old furniture. One of them, an old wooden wardrobe in my bedroom, became the center of terrible events. At first, everything seemed normal. The closet stood in the corner of the room, its doors closed normally, and I kept my things in it. However, at night I began to hear strange noises from inside this closet. The noises were rustling and loud, and they woke me up every night. The first night I decided that it was just the creaking of wooden doors under the influence of the humid night air. But the sounds became louder and stranger. Sometimes I heard some footsteps, as if someone was moving inside the closet, and this made me wake up with animal anxiety. One day, in the middle of the night, when the sounds became especially strange, I decided to check what was happening. I walked over to the closet and slowly opened its doors. The inside was completely empty, but the sounds continued, as if they were coming from inside the closet walls. I turned on the light and resolutely opened the closet again, but there was still nothing inside that could make these sounds. At that moment, my hair stood on end, and I felt that something invisible and sinister was present in the room. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, clenching my fists, waiting to see what would happen next. The sound stopped, but the fear did not leave me. I was able to close the closet doors only the next morning, and never dared to open them again. Over time, I decided to move out of this house, and the old closet remained there, but it no longer bothered me. I have never been able to understand what happened that night, but this story always reminds me that there is something unknown and mysterious in the world, and there are not always answers to all questions. Several years have passed since I moved out of that house, leaving behind a closet and its strange sounds, but the memory of that terrible night and the gloomy closet did not leave me. The new place was modern and bright, and I tried not to think about the past. However, the fear I experienced that night has always been with me. I became more attentive to places, things, and sounds that seemed strange or inexplicable. This may sound stupid, but I began to become interested in the paranormal and explore supernatural mysteries. I read about haunted houses, mysterious objects, and unexplained phenomena. My experience with the closet led me to seek answers to questions that had no scientific explanation. Ultimately, I realized that there are many unknown and mysterious phenomena in the world, and even if we cannot explain them scientifically, this does not make them any less real or less important. My story with the scary closet was a reminder to me that the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes we just have to accept them without trying to reveal all the secrets. The closet remained in that house, which became empty and abandoned. I hope that whoever lives there now does not experience what I experienced. It is possible that the cabinet has ceased to exhibit its strange properties, or it is waiting for the next occupant to reveal its secrets.